is a presentation of the Match Talk Podcast Network. It's time for the ODU Wrestling Monarch Mattcast, a show dedicated to all things related to the Old Dominion Wrestling program. On the web at monarchmattcast.com. Now, here's your host, three-time National Wrestling Writer and Broadcaster of the Year, and 2004 ODU alumnus, Jason Bryant.
From inside the Hampton Coliseum, it's episode 38 of the Old Dominion Monarch Mattcast. Jason Bryan here with you. Actually sitting 2 seats over from our previous guest, Tristan Warner, from episode 37, as the Monarchs have just finished up a 3-1 weekend of the Virginia Duels. Today we're going to be talking with one of the big-time supporters of the program, Bill Calley, an alum, a former wrestler, a guy that's stayed in touch with the program ever since you first enrolled in Norfolk. And first of all, Bill, let's just get some backstory a little bit about how you ended up at Old Dominion University to compete back in the day.
Thanks, Jason. I came to school in 1977. Pete Robinson was the coach, and Billy Martin, it was his first year as our assistant coming out of Oklahoma State. And I came to ODU as a walk-on. They had just graduated from being a 1AA program, and now they're a 1A program. And it was a building program. It was a great opportunity for me to get on the mat and wrestle.
So when you're coming from Northern Virginia, and you're from, and then there's George Mason up there, and there's James Madison and other schools in the area that had wrestling at the time. What made you want to come to Norfolk?
A lot of reasons. Be honest with you, one of them was the brochure that showed the campus, like it looked like it was on the ocean front.
They still do that today.
Yeah. So coming to school, getting away from home, I did talk to George Mason, and I also talked to the University of Richmond, but Norfolk and ODU seemed to be a better fit for me.
So throughout the course of the year, what was it like wrestling? I mean, we've heard stories about the old wrestling room and where it was in. So when you get there, what were the facilities like, and what was that experience like wrestling for legendary coach Pete Robinson?
The facilities actually were a little bit of disappointment. At the time, we were in the rafters at the old field house. They rolled the mats out for us behind a couple of the bleachers. So the room didn't get very warm. We actually were out in the open, so the room didn't get very warm. And even though they had a commitment to wrestling, they hadn't invested in the facilities yet. 2 years later, they did build the new wrestling room, but they took over an old locker room. And so in the wrestling room, we actually had several poles holding the roof up for us. So you had to wrestle around those.
So you were in the room that, the guys that came through in Gray's last couple years, with, Whitby and Small and those guys, that was the room. That was brand new when you were in there.
That became brand new my second year in school. And then eventually ODU really put a commitment to the program, and now wrestling has their own building with great facilities.
So in the day where you go through and then, injuries ultimately ended your career, but what made you want to stay close to the program, even more so now since Steve Martin's been the head coach for the last decade and a half, it seems like. But you'd always been close to the program. You're a wrestling official. Your son wrestled. You've got the local tie, but what creates that tie to the college program?
Well, most of it is the relationships you built when you were in school. I still stay very close to my former coach, Billy Martin. I stay very close with some of my teammates, Terry Kretz, Tim Davison. Randy Payne is working this tournament down here. So it's the relationships you build through the years. They want to stay close to the program. It makes it's a great community. And then the community that's come up since then. You mentioned Tristan here. Seeing some of the kids that Stevie's brought in, he's really built a good program, and it's great, and it's fun to be around.
In the time of transition, I graduated in 2004. It was Gray's last year. You had some good guys come through, guys like Nick Hall, guys like, Jeff Rusek was never an All-American, but he led the nation in pins for a couple years there. When the change was made and Steve Martin ultimately gets the job, what goes through your mind, and what was the first call that you got from Steve and saying to reach out to the alumni? Because that was one of the first things he did. What was that first conversation like?
It was very interesting. I've actually known Steve for a long time. He came and filmed our matches when he was, I don't know how old he was. He's probably 8 or 9 or 10 years old. But he would come and film our matches. Then he's been around for a long time, and I am a high school official. So when he was at Great Bridge, I've known him for a long time. he's always done a great job. But when he came and took over the program, he did make that phone call. And one of the first things he did, he asked me to help out. And he asked if I would help reach out to some alumni. And, of course, before you knew it, he was asking me to help raise money. For whatever reason, I couldn't say no. I've said no to other people, but for whatever reason, Steve had a way of making me say yes, and I've helped out ever since. I helped with the golf tournament, which is our major fundraiser. I help with the socials we have at the NCAAs. We've started socials before every one of the home mats. We want to try to make sure the parents and the fans are being taken care of when they're coming to the matches and having a good time. So, again, Steve Martin has a certain personality that somehow it was hard for me to say no.
There's also, there's so many other people that are involved in from an alumni standpoint and a booster club standpoint. Of course, you can't really look very far without seeing Bill Calley, without seeing Charlie Church, who was basically my neighbor. Get Him Termite and Pest Control was across the street from where I lived, and he was, his kids they're now in college, but they were playing video games at our house and with all the guys, and that relationship with Charlie and you guys really kind of being a big part of this alumni support group.
I look at Charlie and myself as the unofficial, actually we are the head of the Boosters Club, but we're the unofficial fundraisers for the program to help Stevie out. And ODAF wasn't even aware of the work that we were doing for the first couple of years that Steve was there, and they've stepped up and really helped out a lot too, doing both the organizing of the different fundraisers, whether it's golf and the different socials we do. But Charlie and I, for whatever reason, and I think Charlie has got the same problem I do, it's hard to say no to Steve Martin when he asks for help.
Well, and Charlie was also there, a big fan when Gray was finishing up his career. And when you look back at this situation, it's kind of hard for me. I have to separate myself being a media guy, but you're still down here in the area and you see the progress. And, what was it like for you when you sat there and realized Ryan Williams is trotting up to the raised podium to wrestle in the NCAA finals in 2009? I think that made all the alums happy, but what did that mean for you? Seeing the success built, you feel so good for the kids who are involved in the program, whether it's Ryan, whether it's Tristan, whether it's James Nicholson, to see the work that they had put in and see that ODU basically was on the map. And it made me proud to wear my ODU wrestling shirt when I'm at the NCAA tournament. Yeah, because right after that, I remember I was wearing an Old Dominion jacket after the things were done, and people were like, hey, ODU Ryan Williams. I was like, man, that's never happened before. So, and now here locally, there's been also an outreach because a lot of the Old Dominion Wrestling alumni that wrestled for Pete, that wrestled for Billy, for Wade, for Coach Simons, they stayed in the area and they own businesses. And what's been that key to reaching out and getting those guys involved in the program? Whereas they were like, yeah, I wrestled Old Dominion, and they're like, okay, cool. Now there's an active effort to get all those alumni that are business owners and leaders in this community involved with the program in some way, shape, or form.
And a lot of those folks donate both money and time to the program. And I think the reason they do that is the same reason I do it, is there was a community that was built, there was friendships that were built when they were in school, and they want to continue it. It's a great way for a lot of us to get together and have a beer before a match or get together and see the success that Stevie's doing, the work he's putting in. So, again, it goes back to community.
I gotta know some Pete Robinson stories. I gotta hear it because we've heard Pete stories over the years. David Lindgren told me a story that, this guy's not very tough. He goes out or what he told Wayne Bright before he wrestled Gable. What were some of your Pete Robinson moments?
A couple that really come to mind. One was we were wrestling at William & Mary, and as I was trotting out on the mat, Pete grabbed me by the arm and said, Bill, if you don't beat this kid, I'm going to come out there and maul you. Then another one, Pete was always telling stories when we took trips, and he had different riddles and stories, and you had to try to figure them out. And he was really proud that it took the wrestlers a whole year to figure out some of his different riddles. He's a great storyteller.
What was one of the most memorable trips that you recall from that era?
We were wrestling at Franklin Marshall, and we got caught in a snowstorm, and it took us probably 10 hours to make a 4 or 5 hour trip. And then we got snowed in, had to stay an extra day. But one of the funny things that happened on the way to the trip, stopped at the gas station. And the kid that was pumping gas in Pennsylvania, Billy asked him if he wrestled, and he said he did. And he says, what'd you place in the state last year? He says, third. Billy started recruiting him right there in the gas station.
Did he end up coming?
I don't think Billy closed the deal on that one.
Man, if he'd have worked at the Sheets in Breezewood, I think he would have nailed it. But it's Tristan sitting there giving the fist pump because he knows the interchange there well. Now, as the program, it's had its ups and downs, and then it became a fully funded program under Steve. But in Gray's years, there was good talent that came through. What do you remember about when Nick Hall first stepped on campus?
I remember Nick Hall very well, and the year that I really remember, and I don't specifically remember when he stepped on campus, but the year their NCAAs were down at the University of North Carolina, ODU put a pretty good showing on that year. We had Jody Staler in the finals. Nick Hall was on the team. We had a really good squad, and the really big thing that I understood about Nick was that he was one of the premier recruits in the country, and he chose to come to ODU. And the reason he chose to come to ODU is a lot of the high school coaches out there still knew Gray, and they knew Gray as one of the great wrestlers of all times, and that they sent Nick here to get that tutelage.
Gray's walking around here at the Virginia Duels, and, I was never on the team, but I'd always call Gray my coach. And you'd sit there and you'd listen to him tell stories. What are some of the things you learned from Gray, after your career's over and he took over the program, that you sit and talk with Gray and you learn things about wrestling and you're like, oh, really, I didn't know that? Gray's got some great stories.
Gray does have some great stories, and what I really saw out of Gray was patience. He worked with all the kids regardless of the talent, and he had a great deal of patience, but he was able to take good talent and make it better. I thought he was a very, very good coach, and as a person, he's a great person to sit and talk to. He gave me some parental advice when I first started. We had a family. My son was 4 years old, and I asked him, I said, when do you start getting your son involved in wrestling? And he says, start hanging around wrestling. He'll hang around with you. He'll see what's going on, and then he wants to get involved. And that's one of the reasons I started refereeing, because I wanted to get involved with the sport or stay involved with the sport without having to put the time in as a coach. And I got that wrestling/parental advice from Gray.
Yeah, and it's also you're in a situation where you don't have to get beat up by the kids all the time, and you can save your joints.
Yes, you can, and God bless all these coaches, the amount of time they put in and how hard they work with the kids, and they get very little in the way of pay for it, but they get a great deal back in the satisfaction of what they've done for those kids.
Now, I've brought this up on other shows about how many alums, like here in the area, are coaching places, and you are, as an active high school official, you've refereed them as high school students, then you saw them wrestle at Old Dominion as students. Now they're coaching. You're seeing, Ben Summerlin over at Hickory, Matt Small at Great Bridge, Jesse Pierce at like Nathan Coburn's down here in front of us right now coaching with Hickory, and that line has been going on since, the early 90s. What's it like when you sit and be like, man, it creates another dynamic with like, okay, I've officiated you, I've watched you, now I'm warning you for team points.
I tell you what, that evolution, that full circle has been one of the enjoyable things. See kids come up as middle school students, come through high school, see them go off to college, see them become national champs. And then they come back and they're coaching, they come back and now they've got kids and their kids are wrestling. It's just a great thing. That's one of the great things about wrestling. And you develop a different relationship with some of these guys. The coaches, the kids that wrestled at ODU now are coaches, and I have to warn them for whatever. It's the heat of the battle, or the heat of the moment. It's wrestling. Afterwards, we go out and have a beer.
Now, mannerisms. This is something that I've learned, that if you wrestled for Gable, there's certain things that he does that his assistants have kind of, or proteges have come through. You'll see the hand up in the fist, the stall. Then you notice that Steve pulled some of those mannerisms, and then you notice wrestlers who wrestled for Steve at Great Bridge. Jamie Kelly, for example, that's the way he called stalling. And do you see that some of Steve's mannerisms coming through in the guys that wrestled for Great Bridge or Old Dominion that are now coaching at the high school level? You're like, man, I am never going to get away from that Steve Martin chirp in my ear.
Steve had a way to talk to the officials when he was on the side of the mat, and he still does. Ask any of the college referees. But you're right. One of the things I see out of the kids that wrestled for Steve, they coach very aggressively. Their kids are very aggressive on the mat. There's not that much stalling. But Steve Martin has a way about him. He's probably one of the great all-time chirpers on the side of the mat.
When we talk about officiating, what's the best thing about wrestling officiating to you? This is where we're getting away from the Old Dominion style, maybe the part about not getting beat up by the kids and staying around wrestling, but you've been an official a long time. I think there's a call or two I might have disagreed with you on back in the day, but what's the best thing about officiating for you?
The best thing is if I'm doing a good job, and I'm always trying to get better, I get to help make sure that the right kid wins. The kid who's being aggressive, the kid who's doing the right thing wins. I don't dictate the mat, but I get to help officiate that and make sure that everything's going above board and the right kid's winning.
And you got the best seat in the house.
Amen to that. You do have the best seat in the house. And as an official, even when I'm not refereeing, I can sneak down on the mat and watch from wherever I want to. I'm afforded that luxury. It is the best seat in the house.
Nelson Woodhouse once told me a story. He says he was watching his son Stacy state final match, I want to say 1997, 98, in that range. And he didn't realize the referee in that match was the late Gary Beatson. And he said, when Nelson starts officiating, he said, yeah, the best thing I knew about that match is I didn't know who the official was. And that's kind of the rule of the official. You don't ever want to be noticed. How do you go above and beyond to not be noticed?
Don't over-officiate. Let the kids wrestle. Try to stand back as far as you can without getting in their way. This is a comment Tristan and I were talking about earlier, but be in the right position to be able to make that call, and it makes the job a whole lot easier.
And you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great officials. We mentioned the late Gary Beatson. Of course, the late Bob Simon was very, very entertaining when he was an official, would even crawl under places. But who are your favorite referees and friends you've had to work with over the years that may have come from that Old Dominion era with you?
So Ray Bousman's actually a very good official. Steve and Tim Davison were both very good officials that I worked with. They helped me as I came along. Ken Berger's helped me a ton. But when I was actually refereeing, it was Doc McCormick. He was our best official when that came over to ODU every time. And then carrying on that tradition, after I was gone, of course, but Mike McCormick is now one of the best officials.
Is it kind of cool to be able to have, Pat was the head of the NCAA wrestling officials for such a long time, and have him right in your backyard?
Yeah. It was unbelievable. He would come by and talk to us when we were wrestlers to help us at the beginning of the season to know a little bit more about what the officials are looking for, what's changed in the rules, having him right here. And you think about Virginia wrestling. There's good wrestling in Virginia, but it's not necessarily the hotbed of the whole country. But we still had some of the top officials right here in our back door, and they helped us become better wrestlers and now better officials.
Switching gears back to Old Dominion, finishing up the tournament. It's been kind of an up-and-down season. Not everything's always going to go 100% all the time, but thoughts on the MAC, the move to the MAC from a couple years ago, the administrative support, how you think the fan base and the alumni treats an up-and-down season. I mean, I'm texting Warner half the time going, what the heck's going on down there? If something doesn't go right. And, put your fan hat on and your booster hat on and be like, okay, what's it like to sit there and just be a fan right now?
I think it's great to be a fan. This year's team, we've got a couple holes. Stevie's doing a great job of trying to fill some of those holes. But we also have a couple studs. We at 84 and at 97, I think we're going to have two kids that can step on the podium, and we like to see them step high as possible on the podium. At 65, Sheldon Wright, a local kid, we got an opportunity to have him on the podium. But as a fan, we compete well. We've had some teams that are in the past, I think, that were better than this year's team, but you see the progress that some of these kids are making. Mikey Hayes at 49, it's great to see some of the wins he's having. He's a fifth-year senior, and he's worked his off just to be in the position he's in today. Wrestling is a grind. These kids that are in the room every day, it's not that much fun. And to see some of them put all that work in and then receiving the success, as a fan, it gives me a lot of satisfaction.
And as an alum, what do you think about the job that the administration and Wood Selig has done for the wrestling program?
I think Wood's doing a good job, but as an alum and someone who's very involved, I've gone to lunch with Wood a handful of times. And when he first came in, one of my first questions was, is wrestling on the long-term plan for ODU athletics? Are you going to continue to support it? And he said, yes, it is. Yes, it will be. This area cares a lot about wrestling, and so does ODU. Of course, with football and football spending a lot of money, you worry about that. But he's made a commitment to the wrestling program, and I think part of it started when they built that building. That's a showcase building to bring recruits in. Going to the MAC conference, I think we got lucky there. That's one of the best conferences in the country, and we get to participate in that, which means we get to wrestle top competition year-round, which helps us in the long run when it comes time to go to the NCAA. So I think we got a lot of support with the administration, we got a lot of support with the fan base, and we're in a great conference, and we're in a great place right now.
Bill Calley, proud alum, proud supporter. Thanks for hanging out here on the Monarch Matcast.
Jason, thanks for having me over. I appreciate it.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.